new Hugh Grant film Heretic based on a true story? Who's heard about the film Heretic with Hugh Grant? Now we're going to talk about this movie and I'm going to show you a clip of the trailer and then we're going to discuss the case that I think it's based on. Okay? Here's an article about Heretic from the Toronto International Film Festival. Quote, "The film is deliciously dark and frequently hilarious. This chamber horror from writer-director duo Scott Beck and Brian Woods considers how an innocent chat about theology can go terribly awry. It stars Hugh Grant in a brilliantly against-type performance. Heretic is a fiendishly irreverent tale about battling convictions. Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, and Sister Barnes, played by Sophie Thatcher, are cheerfully going about their mission to spread good news about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Working down a list of doors to knock on, they arrive at the quiet suburban house of Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant, who seems not only polite and hospitable, but also genuinely fascinated about the history and teachings of Mormonism. I mean, who isn't, right?
From the Book of Mormon!
The Book of Mormon? What's that?
The book that Joseph Smith found.
Who's Joseph Smith?
Tell us the story of Joseph Smith again, Dad.
Joseph Smith was called a prophet. Dum 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 dum.
In fact, Mr. Reed is quite knowledgeable about all the world's major religions and is eager to discuss them with the women, perhaps too eager. With the rain coming down outside and Mr. Reed's wife making pie in the next room, the setting is utterly cozy. The only thing that could spoil it would be if Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes wanted to leave. Half the fun of Heretic is waiting to see where it leads you next. Let's take a look at it.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am.
Are you interested in learning about our Savior, Jesus Christ? Hi.
Good afternoon.
Hi, are you
My name is Sister Barnes, and
oh my gosh. Are you interested in learning more about the Church of Jesus Christ?
Come on in.
We can't come inside unless another woman is present.
My wife is home. Does that count?
Great.
You like pie?
Yeah.
My wife has pie in the oven.
I could tell that you are a very spiritually curious person.
I think it is good to be religious, to find your faith in a doctrine you actually believe.
Well, our work here is done.
Now, I will go and check on the pie.
So sleep, silent angel.
Can you fit through this? You're crazy.
we just need to go home.
I won't keep you if you wish to leave. But I want you to choose which door to go through based on your faith.
What does this have to do with us leaving?
Everything.
I think that we're being studied.
It will make your hearts beat faster. It may even make you want to die. Do not be afraid. You will witness a miracle.
So see, when I watch that, I get Saw vibes from that trailer. I deeply do. It feels like there's this little bit of misery in there as well. Little misery vibes, right? Nice person, comes off like they're on your side, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in the house and you can't get out, and you don't quite know why, but it starts to slowly unravel why you're stuck in this house, and then you start to go, what the hell am I doing here? And then this person starts to unload all these traps and horrible things. Saw. So is this based on a true story? The writers and directors haven't said. They haven't said whether it is, and they haven't said whether it isn't. But I think it's based on this creepy little story that most people know little to nothing about. And it happened in the 1970s. It's the story of Robert Elmer Kleasen. It's a murder case that's been dubbed the real Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was made before the murders and had nothing to do with these murders. Robert Elmer Kleasen was born on September 20th, 1934, was convicted and sentenced to death, a ruling that was later overturned, for the murder of 2 Mormon missionaries in 1974. The missionaries were Gary Darley, who was 20 years old, and Mark Fischer, who was 19. Apparently they, quote, felt sorry for him and they just wanted to help him. But it wasn't just the fact that he killed them. It's how he did it that made international news.
Right from the get-go, the evidence was that he was the last person to see him and that he was unhappy with the Mormons and that everybody was afraid of him. But there was no body. No bodies.
Despite there being no bodies, a mass of circumstantial evidence linked Kleasen to the Mormons' murder. By his trailer, the police found an ID badge with a bullet hole through it. Inside the trailer, they found the Mormons' blood-stained watches and apartment keys. Using these clues, the investigators began to piece together exactly what they thought had happened on the night that the boys disappeared.
Kleasen was apparently a very good marksman, and he had set up kind of a personal shooting gallery behind his trailer. And he would frequently shoot the target and then send his guests down to fetch the target and return for them to examine it and see how many bullseyes he had. And several of those people related to me that they would turn around and come back with a target to find Kleasen sighting down on them with the rifle, which he obviously thought was very entertaining. That may have been what happened to these young men. They may have been sent down to retrieve a target and were shot.
The prosecutor's answer to what then happened to the bodies also lay in Kleasen's trailer. They seized a seemingly innocuous manuscript written by a John T. Williamson. Williamson was another alias of Kleasen, and in it he described in detail his habits of killing, dissecting, and disposing of animal carcasses.
The whole deer can really be cut up to fit a very small space.
He went into great detail in there, not only about how many deer he would kill, but also how to get rid of carcasses. And of course, he didn't put it in human terms, but it's easy enough to translate that into human terms.
You certainly never set out any of the deer parts in your garbage. Leave no evidence such as guts behind.
The district attorney held up that notebook and read from it to the jury and said, this is what happened to those bodies.
The final pieces of the jigsaw were falling into place for the prosecution. Forensic scientists examined the taxidermy studio next to Kleasen's trailer. In it was a bandsaw used for cutting up slaughtered animals. On the blade of the saw, they found hair that matched that of Gary Darley and Mark Fischer.
It appears that he dissected them, cut them up. He actually threw the body parts in what's called a tankerage pile behind the taxidermy shop with other carcasses and stuff, and it was hauled off to be made out of fertilizer. But because you had human head, somebody would see that. It looks like he actually took the bandsaw and cut the heads, sliced the heads apart.
These were 2 people known to Kleasen, people who were trying to help him out. Young men who were being nice guys. To take the head of somebody and cut it up, basically in the blade of a bandsaw. I couldn't do that. I don't think a normal human being can do that. The sort of gag reflex would prevent you from doing it.
So what happened to Kleasen? He was convicted on one of the murders. They weren't able to actually find enough physical evidence to try him for the other murder, but they did find that evidence that you saw in the video of the name tag, the bullets, and then some of the blood and some of the, information that led them to believe that he was the one that actually killed that particular person. It would be years later that he would actually be tried for both, and the DNA evidence would point to him. So what are the parallels between this story and Heretic? Let's lay it out. So number one, it's 2 missionaries visiting a lonely man in a remote part of the country, very similar. Obviously, there's male and female between the 2, but there's these 2 men that are going to visit this guy in the remote part of the country, and then there's these 2 women that are visiting this guy in the remote part of the country. The man they visit is misrepresenting himself. Clearly, there's no wife of Hugh Grant in Heretic, and clearly Kleasen was known to tell elaborate stories about himself. They set a trap for the victims once they're in the house. So in both cases, once the victims got in the house, the perpetrator then flipped the script after a moment, stopped being the nice guy, and then became the crazy, insane person that they later on become. I don't know what happens in The Heretic. I can't wait to see it. It looks like an amazing movie, but I do see some parallels in there. And the fourth one is it seems to be that they're teaching the victims some kind of moral lesson. So in The Heretic, it's based on this sort of moral lesson that he's trying to teach them about choosing whether or not they really believe in their faith or not. I don't know the full movie. I'm going to see it, and I'll get back to you guys once I do, but it seems to be that that's sort of the premise. It's the Saw thing, right? He's trying to teach them some moral lesson. And then, of course, in the case of Kleasen, he was angry at the church. He was wanting to teach the church some lesson about how they did him wrong and how they were supposed to have done something the correct way, whatever he viewed was the correct way in his brain, and so he was going to take it out on these missionaries by killing them. So does that mean that the whole Heretic is based on this story? No. I mean, obviously it's not entirely based on it. Obviously there's some weird puzzle maze thing that's happening in The Heretic. But many movies just draw on stories from the headlines. They don't necessarily say, hey, you know what, this entire movie is based on this story. You know, in one of my previous videos, I talked about The Strangers, and that was based on the Manson murders. And The Strangers wasn't entirely based on the Manson murders, but it was inspired by it, right? And I think it's likely that this filmmaker could have been inspired by this story. It was a big story at the time. I'm not sure how old these filmmakers are. Even though it's not a story that we know about, I haven't even heard about it. I live in Utah, Mormon capital of the world, and I never even heard about this story of Kleasen who killed these missionaries down in Texas. But at the time, it was a big story. And it takes a little while to actually find this story. It's about 10, 12 pages dug deep in a Google search, but you can find it. And I think it's likely that maybe this was a story that they found about vulnerability and being alone with somebody that you think you know, but you really don't. And you kind of trust them and think that maybe there's something a little off, but they're not off enough to where they're going to cause you any physical damage. And I think that's the case. What do you guys think? Is this an original film that drew on absolutely no stories, but is just a clever thing that these filmmakers came up with? Or do you think it could be based on another missionary story? Or do you think it's based on this story? Let me know in the comments, guys. As always, subscribe, like, comment. You guys know the drill. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time.